22 years that he prosecuted allegations of financial exploitation, abuse, and neglect. And without further ado, please welcome Paul Greenwood.
Thank you so much, Tori, and thank you, Andrew and Jamie, for setting the scene for us today. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for arranging an incredible day for me. Fall colours, blue sky, a little bit of snow. What else can I want? It's wonderful. And it really is a joy to spend this time with you. Good to see you. I met this gentleman last week in Lexington, Kentucky, and he works for the Attorney General's office in New Hampshire. So it's great to see you. Thanks for coming. It's great. So, and I was thrilled when Tori shared with me the agenda about someone who I've never met, Karen Cornell. And so I started Googling about her. How many of you have actually met Karen and know her? She is a visionary, isn't she? A pioneer. A beautiful lady. It was tragic that she passed away from brain cancer. And so often in cases that I prosecuted, I never got to see the victim because I was dealing with a homicide. And I learned a lot about them after their death, and always wished that I could have met them. I wish I could have met Karen. And so I just wanted to show you some of the descriptions given about Karen. I love this, a free spirit. I love meeting free spirits. She made friends easily. She radiated optimism, fun, loyalty. A woman of valor who epitomized the traditional Irish virtues of grace, faith, courage, hope, generosity, charity. She saw the future, advocated tirelessly for protection of the vulnerable, and relished her work in compliance and fraud investigation. And then they talked about her unwavering sense of fair play and justice. What a tremendous epitaph that is for somebody. She got the state legislature in New Hampshire to pass a law criminalizing financial exploitation of elders, which was signed into law in 2014 and part of the New Hampshire Criminal Code that led to the reconstitution of the Elder Abuse and Exploitation Unit in New Hampshire's Attorney General's office. So just a tremendous pioneer, and I think it's very fitting, Tori, that you and your committee wanted to honour her today at this conference, and I hope you will pass on to her family our deep appreciation for the legacy that she's left and the inspiration that she is to someone like me who's never ever met her, but who's understood a little bit more about who she is. So, right now, I've just sworn you in as jurors, okay? You're in my courtroom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, that's great. Jurors aren't supposed to answer back, but I love it. This is going to be an easy trial for me. You have been gathered here today by the judge who explained to you that this is a case of elder financial exploitation. But it's more than that. And this defendant over here, Donald Wade, is charged with ripping off Ruth Wine. Ruth Wine, age 97. Ruth, sadly, as you will hear during the next couple of days during testimony, was a lady who succumbed to that insidious illness and disease called Alzheimer's. Some of you jurors know somebody, maybe within your own family, who's had Alzheimer's. And Ruth was at an advanced stage of her Alzheimer's. And you'll hear that she lived in this very nice skilled nursing facility called Seacrest, a few miles from this courthouse in Encinitas. And you'll also meet her long-time ex-neighbor called Dorothy. Now Dorothy, I think she'll forgive me, you will, I think, conclude that she's a little feisty, but she has a heart. Because you see, Dorothy lost touch with Ruth when Ruth went into the skilled nursing facility several years ago. Dorothy doesn't drive. And Dorothy will tell you that about 18 months ago, she decided she wanted to renew her acquaintance with Ruth. So one day, she hired this guy, Donald Wade, taxi driver, to drive her up to Seacrest and meet with Ruth. And Dorothy was shocked because there was Ruth sitting in her four walls and not being stimulated by anybody or anything. Right then, Dorothy, and she'll tell you this, decided she was going to arrange once every 2 weeks on a Wednesday afternoon to take Ruth to several places around Encinitas. She would take her to a lovely restaurant in Encinitas. She would then take her to the ocean to take a look at the waves. And then, curiously enough, she took Ruth to Ruth's bank. One thing that may shock you during the course of this testimony is you will discover that even though Ruth had advanced Alzheimer's, she still operated her own bank account. Well, of course, Dorothy didn't drive. So who do you think she hired every other Wednesday afternoon to take her up to Ruth, to the ocean, to the restaurant, and to the bank? Oh yes, this defendant, Donald Wayne. But Dorothy, in her feistiness, told Donald in no uncertain terms, if ever we are unable to do this, you're never going to take Ruth out on your own. Well, you're going to hear about 5.5 months ago, Dorothy fell ill on a Monday afternoon. She called Donald on the Tuesday, and she said, Donald, I'm cancelling tomorrow's visit. Do you think Donald heard that? Do you think he complied with it? Oh no, because you will hear testimony that on that very next afternoon, Donald went to the skilled nursing facility and picked up Ruth. Now, where do you think he took her? Do you think he took her to the ocean? Do you think he took her to the restaurant? Where do you think he took her to? He took her to one place only, and that was the bank. And you're going to hear testimony from the bank teller, Jennifer, age 22, who will tell you that this defendant brought Ruth in her wheelchair and presented to Jennifer a signed surrender form for a $98,000 certificate of deposit, a withdrawal from Ruth's account, signed by Ruth. Jennifer will also tell you that at no time during this interaction did Jennifer ever speak to Ruth. She only spoke to the defendant. And during that conversation, Jennifer asked him one question: who is Ruth wanting this CD funds to be payable to? And he answered her, Ricardo Buchanan. And Jennifer asked Donald, who is Ricardo Buchanan? And the defendant's answer was, he's Ruth's lawyer. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the testimony will show you that Ricardo Buchanan is no lawyer. He is Donald Wade's buddy. And over the course of the next 7 weeks, between the two of them, they spent $97,000. But you're saying to me, well, wait a minute, Mr. Greenwood, you just told us that the CD was $98,000. Where's that other $1,000? You know where it went? The bank penalized Ruth for early withdrawal of her money. When I come back up here in a couple of days' time with my closing argument, I'm going to ask each of you to agree with me that the testimony shows beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant is guilty not only of one count of elder financial exploitation, he's also guilty of one count of residential burglary, because that Wednesday afternoon when he stepped inside the threshold of Ruth's apartment, he did so with one intent in mind: to rip her off. And that's residential burglary in the state of California. I'm also going to ask you to convict him of one count of commercial burglary. when he entered the bank, he did so with the intent to rip Ruth off. There's one person that you won't see in this courtroom, and that's Ruth, because she died 2.5 weeks ago. You know, there are some cases that stick in your mind forever, and that is one of them. And little did I know this morning that I would meet in this room the cousin of the judge who presided over that trial. Where are you, Carolyn? There you are. This is Carolyn Thompson. And it was her cousin, John Thompson, who was the judge in this case. And I bet you think John will remember this case. Well, I hope he does. And he threw the book at Donald away, thankfully, after he was convicted by the jury. But over the course of this presentation, I will explain why it was that I chose this particular case to illustrate what I've been doing for the last 22 years. So what I want to share with you is what I've learned on this amazing journey, which thankfully is still an onward journey. And one thing, as you obviously can tell, those of you who don't know my story, I'm not exactly your classic Southern California dude. So originally from the UK. It's funny, you know, we were in Lexington last week, and lots of people were talking to me about UK, and I thought, it's amazing, how many people from England? No, UK, University of Kentucky, duh. I should have realised, shouldn't I, quicker than I did. Well, really, how interesting. But one of my proudest moments occurred last May 2018 when I stood in a hall in San Diego with 1,000 other people, and I raised my right hand and I became a United States citizen, and that really has been an amazing experience for me. One of the reasons I put it off for so long is because while I was a prosecutor in the DA's office, unfortunately, several of my colleagues misinterpreted my passion for prosecuting these cases for politics. And honestly, no kidding, the number of my colleagues who would ask me, what office are you running for? So I had a perfect response. I can't vote. What's your next question? So, you know, it was great. So I deliberately put off becoming a citizen until I had left the office, so no one could accuse me of running for DA or Attorney General. So very quickly, how did my journey from the University of Kentucky, from the UK to San Diego start? So they always say, always begin a story with once upon a time, right? There was a young Englishman who met a young lady from Southern California, right? You've heard this story before. Boy, it's really interesting. This is a story that's developing. They just did an interview with a UK channel last night, and it's caused a whole lot of ripple effect. They're saying things that no royal has ever said before, which is very refreshing, which I love. But this is my wonderful wife. We've been married for 41 years, and I met her in San Diego when I was traveling around in 1973. So that's the reason I live now in San Diego. We started our life in England as a married couple, where I was starting life as a lawyer. Firstly as a barrister, wearing that white wig and a black gown. And my wife said I looked silly, and I agreed. And so I quit being a barrister, and I became a general practitioner called a solicitor for 13 years, practicing criminal law. 4 days of the week I was defending crooks, but on day 5 I was prosecuting them. Not the same ones, just different ones, you know, that'd be awkward. And so then after 13 years, sadly my wife had some very serious health challenges, and as a result I knew I needed to bring her back to her hometown. So that's why we ended up in San Diego. We have 2 kids. This is my daughter, Rebecca. She was 10 when we moved back to San Diego, and it's interesting, she kind of struggled a bit with the transition, and after she left high school, she said, I want to go back to the UK to do my further education. So you know what happened? She fell in love with a Brit. So they live in London, and they've blessed us with twins, identical twins, who are now 7.5 years of age. Whereas our son, Stephen, was 4 when we moved back to San Diego from UK, and he became the California kid, and he went to UCLA Film School, went and worked with Reddit for a long time, which every kid who's 25 and under knows about Reddit, but nobody else over 25 knows what it is, but it doesn't matter. And then 3 years ago, he went and broke out and did his own thing. What he's holding there is the world's first something. It's the world's first underwater virtual reality mask. And it's very exciting. He's formed this company 3 years ago, and he and 2 other guys, very bright guys, and he's selling this to water parks all over the world. And you either go down a water slide wearing this thing, doing a virtual reality experience as you're going down a slide that you have no clue where you are. It's frightening, but exhilarating at the same time. Or secondly, you can be underwater snorkeling and wearing this mask, and you swim in a pool, hotel pool, water park pool, or if you're lucky enough, a private pool, and you're swimming with sharks and with manta rays, but you don't get bitten. It's brilliant. So hopefully it will come to a park near you. He's just sold it to Kalahari in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and it's very cool. So we moved in 1991. I joined the DA's office 2 years later in 1993. Thankfully, I was able to pass the California bar at the first attempt because of all the times I had watched Cagney and Lacey, Hill Street Blues and Streets of San Francisco. It was in America, but it happened. I was in civil practice for 2 years, but I didn't enjoy it. All I wanted to do was get back into the courtroom. And I knew that because the criminal defense was very different in the UK from California, I didn't want to be a defense attorney. I only wanted to be a prosecutor. So they were very kind. They took a risk. They had never hired a resident alien with a green card before, but they took a chance with me, and I'm so glad they did. This became my career for 25 years. And I can honestly tell you, not one day went by when I went to work thinking, I don't want to do this. They tell us that over 75% of all lawyers in California hate what they do. They're disillusioned, and they find their jobs very disheartening. I never had that experience one day. But I came to this realization last March that I needed to leave. And it was a hard decision to make, but it was all based on numbers. I'd been in the office 25 years, and I thought, yeah, this is a good time to maybe move on. I'd also been married for 40 years, and I thought I need to spend more time with my wife, so that's a good idea. But this number also impacted my decision to leave, because I had just turned 66. And I discovered something fantastic. When you turn 66 in America and you're in full-time employment, 2 words emerge. What are those 2 words?
Social Security.
Yes! Exactly! My favorite day of the month? The 3rd Wednesday of every month. You know? It's brilliant! And, you know, so when you add up your county pension that you've invested in for 25 years with your Social Security, it all seems to make sense. By the way, I want you to take a look at this slide. This is what happens after you turn 66. So I take you back to 1979 and then look forward to 2019. It's all true. When I show this to people in their 80s, I literally have to pick them up off the floor. They are doubled up in laughter because they absolutely understand this. And my favorite one is going to a new hip joint in 40 years ago, but today getting a new hip joint. You know? So there we are. This number also impacted my decision to leave the office, and it's something that Andrew referenced in his presentation. This headline, and by the way, this is not my county pension, okay, just This headline appeared last year in Bloomberg Press, and I'm going to show you the actual headline, just so that you can absorb it. And when I saw this, I challenged it. And I called up the journalist, Nick Lieber, and I said, how do you know this? Because I had been brought up on a figure that Andrew quoted, which was $2.6 billion from MetLife. And some of you have seen that report. I said, why do you say it's 37 billion? He says, you know what? The scary thing is, Paul, I think it's actually conservative. I think it's higher than that. And that seemed to comport with what I was experiencing last year from January onwards. I was getting more and more phone calls at my desk from all over the country, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Wyoming, from adult protective services workers. And this is what they were saying: Mr. Greenwood, we are seeing a huge increase in the number of referrals of elder financial exploitation. But we are frustrated because we cannot get law enforcement to take these cases. Would you please come and spend a day in our jurisdiction and see what we can do to shake it up? And I felt the time maybe has come that I needed to spread my wings and pass on the baton to another brilliant young lawyer that I've been mentoring for 8 years and give him the chance to take over the program. And he's done that, and he's taking it to new heights. To give me a chance to share my lessons that I've learned over the last 22 years. And that's what I've been doing. But how did my journey begin? January 1996. I had been in the office 3 years. I was doing regular felony prosecutions, robberies, drug deals, burglaries. Suddenly I get the phone call from the boss. Now, why is it that when you get a phone call from the boss, you always think you've done something wrong, right? It's just human nature. I walk in and I could tell he was really ticked off. And I thought, oh gee, who have I upset? You know, what have I done? And he says, sit down. He says, I've had a really angry phone call from Adult Protective Services. And I said, excuse me, who are they? He says, I don't know, but I know they're angry. I said, well, is it about me? He said, no, it's not about you. But it will be in a minute. He said, they're angry at us collectively because they're telling me, that the elected DA of this big office, that we are ignoring a huge escalating crime called elder abuse. And he said, to placate them, I told them, I'll fix it. I said, what did you tell them? He said, I told them I have somebody in mind to start a whole new unit. Oh, really? That's good. Yeah. I'm looking at him. Oh, really? Me? Oh, okay. And so that was it. That was the start of a journey. Now, when I walked out of his office, because I said to him, well, what is elder abuse? He said, I don't know, but go talk to APS. When I walked out, and I thought, well, what's just happened? I said, okay, I'll do this for 2 years. And then I'll ask for a transfer back into the hardcore prosecutions that I've just left. 22 years later, I was still doing it. The irony was that as a career prosecutor, I wanted to do those homicides. I wanted to do those rapes. I wanted to do those serious home invasion robberies. The tragic and ironic part was I did that for 22 years. The only difference was that all my victims were either elders or dependent adults. So they put me into a family protection division. Family protection because we were doing child abductions, child abuse, and domestic violence, and they felt it was a good fit. And it became a very good fit because the challenges and the issues that I faced had been previously faced by my child abuse colleagues and my domestic violence colleagues, and I was able to learn a lot from them. And so the journey lasted 22 years of prosecution, but it's still going on. And 2 reasons primarily why it's been going on for so long. These 2 people. It's my mum and my dad. Sadly, we lost my dad 3.5 years ago to advanced Alzheimer's. He was diagnosed when he was 79, and I still remember the doctor telling me, Dr. Paul, you have to understand Alzheimer's is a terminal illness. Your father will die from Alzheimer's unless something else intervenes in the meantime. And that was really hard to take. And it was also hard to see my brilliant father, who was an educator for so many years. In fact, I had the misfortune of being one of his pupils. He was the principal of my elementary school. Imagine being taken to school by your headmaster. Imagine being taken home by your headmaster. Imagine doing your homework with your headmaster downstairs. Freaked me out! Yeah. But he was just a tremendous pioneer of education. But he was also a hero. Because I learned at the age of 7 that my dad had been a B-25 bomber pilot in World War II and survived 79 bombing missions. And on mission number 6, it all went wrong. He was shot down over the Adriatic and was rescued by Yugoslav fishermen. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to share that story with you today. So this is what I learned, that my dad, like so many of his generation, was a hero. As was my mum, who was a survivor of the Blitz, and who told me story after story of how she literally ran from the double-decker bus in London and would dive into a store front because she heard the doodlebug, which was the pilotless bomb, coming over. And you have, once the engine cuts out, you have 30 seconds to take cover before it comes down on your street. My mother is now 96. 3 weeks ago, my mother, reluctantly, but she did finally agree to what my sister and I have been begging her to do for a long time: leave the house that I grew up in and move into an assisted living facility. And she did that, and it's the best thing for her. When I heard that she had moved, I literally booked a flight, jumped on a plane, and flew to England the very next day because I wanted to meet the administrator. And I wanted to meet her quickly. Hi, my name's Paul. Nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. Greenwood's son. And by the way, here's my business card. Elder abuse consultant. Yeah, that doesn't hurt, you know. If you have any issues, just let me know. You know. So she's being well cared for in the facility. So my journey has taught me many things. And one of the things it's taught me is it's easy to get older adults, the victims, to come to court. No problem. Because there's a thing called a subpoena. But the challenge is keeping them happy while they're at court. And the best way to keep them happy is to let them sit before they go to court to testify and watch The Price is Right. And they're soap operas with Susan Lucci. So that's what we've done. We converted our whole office into a waiting area just for senior citizens. We also learned another lesson. Several of my victims have issues with dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, early to moderate stages of those illnesses. And some of them have never testified in a courtroom before. We learned early on, thanks to our lessons learned from child abuse victims, that the best way to overcome nerves, panic, fear, is to bring a dog into the witness box. And I hope every single prosecutor's office, I hope your U.S. Attorney's office will use them, I hope your AG's office will use them, I hope you actually, does anyone else, you use them?
In our office, yes.
Good, oh, in your office, right, exactly. I was never a great dog lover before, but when these dogs started appearing in our office after they were in court, I became a huge fan of dogs. Because when I come back from court, maybe the judge did a ruling which I didn't agree with, and instead of whining to my colleagues, I would sit in my office, one of these dogs would walk in, sit at my feet, and I would be able to talk to the dog, and then he would lick my nose. It was wonderful. Oh, I felt so much better after that. So, they gave me, was that the cloud? They gave me an office, a phone, and a computer. Which is great, that's what a prosecutor needs, except there was one major problem. I didn't have any cases, not one. I sat in my office literally for about 3 days, and I watched these busy detectives walk past my office with cases under their arms, but they weren't for me. They were for the child abuse prosecutors, they were for the domestic violence prosecutors. And I kept willing them. I'm here, bring them to me, I need cases. Nobody came with a case. Just silence was what I was dealing with. Because you see, prosecutors, it's the same all over the country. You get hired by a prosecutor's office, they sit you down, they train you for 3 weeks, and then they let you loose. And when they let you loose, they bring in 10 files into your office, and they say, here's your cases. So for 2 years, 3 years, I had cases given to me, but suddenly, I'm now in a brand new program, and nobody was bringing me any cases. This became my challenge for 22 years. How do we overcome this barrier of silence that there is about primarily financial elder abuse, but all forms of elder abuse too? Canada said it well. They said elder abuse thrives on silence, and the time has come to bring it out into the open. The Attorney General for Kansas, his name is Derek Schmidt. 2 years ago, he was nominated and elected as the president of the National Association of Attorney Generals. Can you imagine being the president of NAG? What a title. But he is. And interesting enough, he made elder abuse his social platform. So he went around in Kansas really talking this up, and he made it a national thing amongst other elected attorney generals, which is fantastic. So I had to switch from being a reactive prosecutor to being a proactive prosecutor. We don't teach prosecutors enough to become proactive, and that's a problem. I think every prosecutor should be taught that you spend some of your time in your office, you spend a lot of time in the courtroom, but we should also spend a lot of time out in the community listening to our constituents. And so I had to become proactive. So for 7 months, didn't prosecute one elder abuse case. Instead, I went around the county, and it's a large county, both by way of population, but also by way of geographically. From the beach communities, to the border communities, to the agricultural desert, rural communities, to the military communities, Camp Pendleton, Oceanside area. Fascinating, diverse demographics. But I went around the whole county talking to various folks, including law enforcement, and I learned so much. But one of the biggest things that I learned, which really opened my eyes, was this. We were ignoring, overlooking, or disbelieving many victims of this crime. No wonder APS were angry at us, because I was beginning to see within a few months what they were angry about. And that changed my whole attitude about this assignment. That made me say to myself, you know what? I've just been given a huge opportunity, a huge privilege. I don't want to squander it. I'm going to make this my career assignment as long as my office approves of that. As I went around law enforcement, I discovered, and talking to other prosecutors within my own office, I discovered that we were falling into misconceptions. And I want to share those with you because this is what I've learned. Because if we are going to do more in this tri-state area to bring elder abuse out of the shadows, we've got to understand what is stopping us. What is preventing some of these horrendous cases that we hear about on the news or within our own environments, within our own offices, from coming into a criminal courtroom? So I literally would go around at 6:30 in the morning and at 2:30 in the afternoon to every single police and sheriff's station in our county. And there is a lot of them. And I tell you what, it's an interesting reaction. When you walk into a police officer sort of call at 6:30 in the morning, and you stand there in front of them, they look at you like, what are you doing here? And when the sergeant explains, I'm here to talk about elder abuse, you can almost see them like shut off. So I learned a technique. I said, officers, what I'm about to tell you might be on your sergeant's promotion exam. And they listened. He talked about promotion. Oh, I need to listen to this. So I said, yeah, this is really a hot topic. And I would give them the brief law, and I would ask them, you've got to find me these cases. Bring me these cases. Why don't you bring me these cases? And this is what they told me. Apparently, elderly people make terrible witnesses in the courtroom. That's what I was being told. And I was fascinated by that response, and so I started digging deeper. Why is that? And what was the number one reason I was being told this? What do you think?
Dementia.
Dementia. Memory issues. Otherwise known as forgetfulness. Right? That's what I was being told. All the time. And I kept asking, do you have to be 70 before you become forgetful? No. Any of you who've raised teenagers know exactly what I'm talking about, right? In fact, this is more accurate. Don't you think? The fact that we all multitask, makes us more susceptible to being forgetful. What's your steering wheel look like? All of us rely on stickies, right? We have to, in order to remember everything that's going on in our busy lives. So I was being told by law enforcement and others, and some of my colleagues, Greenwood, you don't want to touch these cases because of this. And each of these is inaccurate except for one. There was one very true statement here, and that's number 3. Oh boy, can they be long-winded. I would get phone calls from older adults, particularly in their 70s and 80s. Mr. Greenwood, I finally got hold of you. Mr. Greenwood, let me tell you my story. No, you're not. No, but I will ask you 25 questions over the next 10 minutes. Because here's the role of a prosecutor. You see, my job is to stand in front of 12 people and convince them with evidence that I'm going to produce that all these 6 elements of the crime have been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. And the judge will tell those jurors that if Mr. Greenwood fails to prove that, even with just one element, if one of those elements is missing, it's a not guilty across the board. So I am driven by elements of the crime. So I have to condition my examination of the person on the phone with elements. Whereas they want to tell me the whole story. And it's 95% of what they want to tell me is irrelevant to what I need to hear. I know they teach in the FBI, but primarily with suspects, ask them open-ended questions. I never used to ask victims open-ended questions. I had to be driven by the focus of the crime. And I want to show you 4 of my victims. And this is why, one of the many reasons why I loved what I did for 22 years. This was a financial abuse case where the defendant worked for Roto-Rooter for many years. By the way, this is not the defendant, this is some poor fella I borrowed from Roto-Rooter's website. But they fired him for dishonesty, but they forgot to get his shirt back. So one day, he's out of work, and he decides that he's going to go rip off some seniors. So what does he do? He drives over to Mount Miguel Covenant Village in Spring Valley in San Diego, which is a huge elderly retirement area, and knocks on the door of 4 victims who live in independent living. And he's wearing the Roto-Rooter shirt, and he says, "Good morning, management has sent me, there's a problem with your plumbing, can I please come in?" Now what he does is the classic, what we call the distraction burglary. You've heard of the distraction burglary, where the person will gain entrance using a fake excuse and then will divert the attention of the victim by asking them to go somewhere else while the suspect is in the other area stealing whatever they can. It happens all the time. This guy said, "I need you to go to the bathroom, turn on the hot and cold taps, and I'm going to be checking the plumbing throughout the house." So while they were in the other bathroom, he was in the living area stealing whatever he could, which was small and valuable. And eventually, they discover, after he's left, each of them discover in turn that they are victims of theft, and they call to the police, and the police do a fabulous investigation, and they bring me this case. And all I have is 4 names of victims and their ages. This lady, 83. This gentleman, 86. This lady, who I will call Agnes, because 95% of all my female victims were called Agnes. 87. That gentleman there, 100 years of age. And I want to let you into a little secret here. When I first started out in 1996, my colleagues in the prosecutor's office made fun of me. And I'll tell you who made fun of me most? The gang prosecutors. Now you can always tell a gang prosecutor because they walk differently. Actually, they don't walk, they swagger. Because they deal with the toughest, most macho crimes, but they know it and they have an attitude. And they literally will come bouncing off their shoes. "Hey, Greenwood, what's up?" I mean, they always talk like gangbangers, you know, these prosecutors. "Hey!" And then they would say, "You're doing what? Elder abuse?" And they literally would look me in the eye and snigger at me and laugh at me. And they said, "Well, good luck." Meanwhile, we're doing our homicides. Enjoy yourself, Greenwood. Literally, they would mock me. But oh, did I have the last laugh? Absolutely. Because a few months later, I would be in the elevator about to go down to my jury trial with my victim, Agnes. And into the elevator walks my gang prosecutor friend with his victim. Oh, you know what his victim looks like, don't you? Exactly. Tattoos on his knuckles, on his neck, saggy trousers, hands on his pocket, eye contact is with the floor, but the best part of all, he's wearing that jacket, which is going to go down really well with San Diego jurors. It's called an Oakland Raiders jacket. And they walk in, and Agnes looks at my gang prosecutor friend and says, "Good morning, young man," and she smiles. Oh, I love that. Because I can see the jealousy dripping off my colleague. And I know what my colleague's thinking. "Greenwood, can I borrow Agnes for 5 minutes?" Because who of the two of us has the tougher job? Me with Agnes? What's her rap sheet looking like? She doesn't even have a speeding ticket for her Buick. Whereas my colleague next door has to impeach his own victim with about 7 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. And he has to try to convince his jury to feel sorry for his victim. I never, ever had that trouble with Agnes. Particularly when I walk into the courtroom, I know she's sitting outside on the bench. "Good morning, Your Honour. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Your Honour, the people are ready to call their next witness, Agnes Smith." She walks in, she stands behind the gate to take the oath from the cloak. I'm standing the other side of the gate. The jurors are sitting there. The witness box is right over there. I'm expecting Agnes to walk right past me to the witness box. Oh no, you know what she does? She comes up to me and then she links arms with me. Perfect. So now I get to walk Agnes slowly past the jury box. Do you think I take every opportunity? You bet I do. And I stop halfway and I kind of turn in. And so Agnes turns with me and she looks at the jurors and goes, "Good morning, everyone." By the time Agnes gets to the witness box, 4 of my jurors want to take her home. It's as simple as that. And that's why now I spend my post-retirement time going around the country trying to persuade every prosecutor that I meet that these cases are fantastic. And you just let Agnes tell her story and the jurors will get it. Look at these 7 ladies. They all lived in the same facility. They all had similar things stolen from them by the defendant who worked in the facility. He was the maintenance guy. So what would he steal from their apartments while he was fixing their problem? What does every elderly lady have? Jewelry! He stole from each of these. Now, I actually, on the day of this, it's called the preliminary hearing, it's the probable cause hearing, I had 13 victims, but only 7 showed up. 3 had medical problems, and the other 3 were on cruises. That's the problem. Living in San Diego, half the time my elderly victims were never there. They were always on Holland America, never on Carnival. It was fun. Yeah, but these 7 showed up, and I can tell you what, when a prosecutor has 7 victims like that, sitting on a bench, ready to testify, and when I walked out, just before they started to testify, I said, "You know, ladies, I haven't asked you, any of you, this. What do you think is the appropriate punishment?" Because, see, I've just been in the courtroom, and the judge had asked me, "Can we resolve this case, Mr. Greenwood?" I said, "Yes, we can." "Well, what's your offer?" I said, "I want this guy to plead to 4 strikes, 4 residential burglaries, and elder financial exploitation, whichever 4 counts he wants, and I want him to stipulate to 10 years prison." And the judge said, "But he's got no prior record." I said, "I know, but he still deserves to go to prison for 10 years. And the public defender said, "No way, Your Honour. Let's put it on." So I walk out, I ask these ladies what punishment, because I wanted to get a reality check. I wanted to make sure I wasn't way off the charts here. Not one of them mentioned prison. They only described what they wanted to do to him. Have you ever met an elderly female who's had her jewelry stolen? She is angry. And I was so shocked, I said, "Time out." I called the public defender from the court. I said, "You better come out, because I don't want to be responsible for anything that happens while these ladies testify with your client sitting 10 feet away." The colour drained out of his face. He was shattered by what they told him. Because you know, on paper they looked sweet, adoring, but they were angry, and he got it. And he said to me, Paul, just wait 10 minutes. 15 minutes later, he came out with a signed blue change of plea form, 10 years stipulated prison, because he had told his client, you may not want to see these ladies, they are really ticked off with you. And that's the power that these witnesses and victims present to a court.